I had been assigned a random roommate, a girl named Alara. She seemed normal, even friendly at first. But as days turned into weeks, I began to notice oddities. Our schedules were polar opposites. While I was part of a nocturnal world, dancing away with my competitive collegiate dance team, Alara seemed to be a creature of the day, always up at the crack of dawn. One evening, after a particularly grueling practice that stretched into the wee hours of the morning, I tiptoed into our shared room. The moonlight streamed in, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I used my flashlight to navigate, ensuring I didn't disturb Alara. But as I settled into bed, I felt her eyes on me, watching, unblinking. It sent shivers down my spine, but I brushed it off as mere fatigue. The next morning, I found the first note. It was placed neatly on my pillow, written in a scrawling, almost manic handwriting. "Night creatures should stay in the dark." It read. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. Was this a joke? I looked over at Alara's bed, but it was neatly made, no sign of her. Days turned into a blur of dance practices and mysterious notes, each one more sinister than the last. "The moon sees all," one said. Another, "Shadows don't lie." I tried to confront Alara, but she always seemed to vanish, slipping away like a wisp of smoke. The atmosphere in the room grew thick with tension. I could feel it, a palpable force, pressing down on me. Every night, I'd hear whispers, soft and insidious, coming from Alara's side of the room. I'd shine my flashlight, but there would be nothing, just the empty expanse of her bed. Desperate and on the verge of a breakdown, I confided in my best friend, Mark. He was a tall, broad-shouldered guy, always ready for a fight. "We need to confront her," he said, determination burning in his eyes. I hesitated, fear gnawing at me, but I knew he was right. The next day, we waited for Alara in the dining hall. The overhead lights flickered intermittently, casting the room in a dim, gloomy light. Students chatted away, oblivious to the storm brewing in one corner. As Alara walked in, Mark stood up, blocking her path. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and menacing. Alara's eyes, usually so cold and distant, now burned with a fiery intensity. "Do we?" she hissed, her voice dripping with malice. The confrontation was swift and explosive. Voices raised, accusations hurled. Students stopped and stared, a captive audience to the unfolding drama. Suddenly, Mark was being dragged away by two burly security guards, his protests falling on deaf ears. I watched, horror-stricken, as Alara stood there, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. The story was far from over. The next day, Mark and I were summoned to the campus police station. Alara had filed a complaint, accusing us of harassment. We tried to explain, to tell them about the notes, the whispers, the sheer terror of it all. But they looked at us with skepticism, clearly not believing a word. It took weeks, but finally, after much persuasion and a few sleepless nights, the housing department agreed to move Alara to a different dorm. I thought the nightmare was over. But I was wrong. One evening, as I lay in bed, trying to catch a few moments of rest, I heard the door creak open. Footsteps, soft and deliberate, approached my bed. I pulled the covers over my head, praying it was just a dream. But then I heard her voice, cold and mocking. "Did you really think you could get rid of me so easily?" The room grew cold, the shadows deepened, and I knew, with a sinking heart, that the true horror had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of meetings with housing services, desperate pleas, and sleepless nights. I felt trapped, a prisoner in my own room. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow seemed to taunt me, reminding me of Alara's haunting presence. One evening, as I sat huddled in a corner, a knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Henderson, the head of housing services. She looked weary, her eyes filled with a mix of sympathy and concern. "We've found a solution," she began. "Alara will be moved to a new dormitory." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. "There's a condition," Mrs. Henderson continued. "Elara has requested one final night in this room. After that, she will leave." I nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. One more night. I could survive one more night. That night, the atmosphere in the room was electric, charged with anticipation. I lay in bed, every sense on high alert. Hours seemed to drag on, each minute stretching into an eternity. Then I heard it. The soft rustle of sheets, the faintest whisper of a voice. I pulled the covers tighter, trying to block out the world. But then I felt a presence, right next to me. Elara's voice, cold and mocking, pierced the silence. "You think you've won, but you're wrong." I mustered every ounce of courage and turned to face her. Our eyes locked, and in that moment I saw something. A deep, unending sadness, a pain that seemed to stretch back eons. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Elara's face contorted, a mix of anger and despair. "I want to be free," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "But you've trapped me here." Confusion clouded my mind. "I don't understand," I stammered. "I've done nothing to you." Elara's gaze softened, the anger replaced by a deep sadness. "Not you," she whispered. "This room. This cursed room." She began to recount a tale, one that sent shivers down my spine. Years ago, long before the college was built, the land was home to a tragic event. A young woman, betrayed by those she loved, had taken her own life. Her spirit, restless and vengeful, had been trapped, bound to the very earth where she had died. Over the years, the land had changed, buildings erected, but the spirit remained, searching for a vessel, a way to communicate, to be free. Elara, with her sensitivity to the supernatural, had become that vessel. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air. I looked at Elara, truly seeing her for the first time. Not as a tormentor, but as a victim, trapped in a nightmare not of her making. We spent the night talking, trying to find a way to free both Elara and the spirit. As dawn broke, a plan was formed. With the help of a local medium, we performed a ritual, releasing the spirit, setting both it and Elara free. The college days that followed were a blur, but the memories of that night remained, a haunting reminder of the thin line between our world and the next. As for Elara, she moved on, leaving the college and the memories behind. But every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of her, a fleeting shadow, a whisper in the wind, a reminder that some bonds, no matter how twisted, are never truly broken. The university's sprawling campus was a maze of old brick buildings, intertwined pathways, and towering trees that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. As a freshman, I was both excited and nervous about starting this new chapter of my life. The ancient dormitory I was assigned to, Wraith Hall, had a reputation for being one of the oldest on campus. Its Gothic architecture, with gargoyles perched on the edges and ivy creeping up its walls, gave it an eerie charm. Upon entering my room, I was met with the sight of my new roommate, whom I'll refer to as Elias. He was a foreign exchange student, with deep-set eyes that seemed to always be observing, always calculating. His pale skin contrasted sharply with his jet-black hair, and he had an unsettling habit of staring a little too long before speaking. Our first conversation was brief. He mentioned he was here more for the experience than the academics. I found it odd but brushed it off, attributing it to cultural differences. The first few nights were relatively uneventful. However, I began to notice peculiarities. Elias would often hum an unfamiliar tune under his breath, a haunting melody that seemed to echo in the corridors of Wraith Hall. He also had an old-fashioned wind-up clock that would chime at odd hours, its melancholic tune filling our room. I would often wake up in the middle of the night to find him sitting by the window, staring out into the darkness, his silhouette illuminated by the pale moonlight. One morning, I awoke with a burning sensation all over my body. Jumping out of bed, I realized that my boxers were coated with some sort of ointment. Elias feigned innocence, but the faint smirk on his face told a different story. I later identified the substance as Tiger Balm. Furious, I confronted him, but he simply laughed it off, calling it a harmless prank. But the pranks grew darker. One evening, after a long day of classes, I returned to our room to find my computer blaring an unsettling, discordant sound that seemed like a mix of screams and white noise. The screen was a chaotic swirl of colors, and in the midst of it all, a single word flashed repeatedly. Watch. Elias sat on his bed, that same smirk playing on his lips, his eyes never leaving mine. I shut down the computer, my heart racing, trying to convince myself it was just another one of his twisted jokes. Things took a turn for the worse when I discovered my new toaster, a gift from my mother, discarded outside our window, lying broken amidst the ivy. When I questioned Elias, he simply replied, "It told me to." Elias's behavior became increasingly erratic. He'd play soccer at odd hours, returning to our room drenched in sweat and mud. But instead of washing up, he'd hang his filthy socks on my fan, letting them dry as the room filled with a putrid stench. I'd often find him whispering to inanimate objects, the beer cans he collected, the old clock, even the broken toaster. He claimed they spoke to him, sharing tales from the past, tales that were meant for him alone. One night, as I tried to study, the room was filled with the overpowering smell of ketchup and stale beer. Turning around, I was met with a horrifying sight. Elias had constructed a makeshift chair out of the beer cans, and seated upon it was a ragged old doll, its eyes missing, its mouth sewn shut. He was whispering to it, his voice a chilling monotone. "They're watching," he murmured. "They're always watching." Sleep became a luxury. The haunting melody Elias hummed seemed to be everywhere, even in my dreams. The wind-up clock's chimes grew louder, more insistent, as if trying to convey a message. And every night, like clockwork, Elias would sit by the window, his gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. One evening, as I lay in bed, paralyzed by fear, the room plunged into darkness. The only sound was Elias's whisper, growing louder and more frantic. "They're here," he hissed. "They've come for us." And in that pitch-black room, as the wind howled outside and the clock's chimes echoed eerily, I felt a presence. Something ancient, something malevolent, something that had been awakened by Elias's pranks. And I knew, with a bone-chilling certainty, that Wraith Hall held secrets far darker than I could ever have imagined. Days turned into nights, and the line between reality and nightmare became increasingly blurred. Elias's antics were no longer just pranks. They felt like rituals, summoning something from the depths of Wraith Hall's history. The ancient building seemed to come alive, its walls whispering tales of sorrow and despair. I knew I had to take action. I approached our resident advisor, a senior named Clara, and recounted the chilling events that had transpired. She listened intently, her face growing paler with each revelation. She confessed that Elias wasn't the first to exhibit such behavior in Wraith Hall. There were whispers of a curse, tied to an old legend about a student who had vanished without a trace decades ago. Clara directed me to the hall director, an elderly gentleman named Mr. Hawthorne. He had been at the university for as long as anyone could remember. As I narrated my ordeal, his eyes, clouded with age, seemed to pierce through time, recalling memories best left forgotten. He spoke of a forbidden room in Wraith Hall, sealed off after the mysterious disappearance of that student. Elias, he believed, had somehow tapped into the dark energy emanating from that room. With Mr. Hawthorne's guidance, I decided to confront the heart of the mystery. Armed with old keys that hadn't been used in years, we ventured into the depths of Wraith Hall. The air grew colder, the weight of the past pressing down on us. We finally stood before a door, its wood warped with age, a single word etched onto its surface. Beware. Inside, the room was a time capsule. Dust-covered furniture, faded photographs, and in the center, a grand old mirror with an ornate frame. As I gazed into it, the reflection was not my own. Instead, I saw a young man, his eyes filled with terror, his mouth mouthing a silent scream. Elias's haunting melody played in the background, and I realized it was a tune from a bygone era, a lament for the lost soul trapped in the mirror. Elias suddenly appeared behind me, his eyes wild, his voice a chilling whisper. "He's been waiting for you," he murmured, pushing me towards the mirror. I felt a pull, a force trying to drag me into its depths. But Mr. Hawthorne intervened, chanting words in a language I didn't recognize. The room shook, the mirror cracked, and with a deafening roar, the trapped soul was freed, leaving behind a shattered reflection and a stunned Elias. Elias's demeanor changed overnight. Gone was the malevolent presence, replaced by a confused young man, struggling to recall the events of the past weeks. Mr. Hawthorne explained that the spirit had been using Elias as a vessel, seeking release from its eternal prison. The university decided to permanently seal the forbidden room, ensuring that no one would ever fall prey to its dark allure again. Elias, deeply remorseful, chose to leave the university and return to his homeland, seeking solace and a fresh start. As for me, the scars of that ordeal remained, a constant reminder of the thin line between the known and the unknown. Wraith Hall stood tall, its secrets buried deep within, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to uncover them. The city's skyline was a distant haze as I arrived at the university. The excitement of starting a new chapter in my life was palpable. The apartment complex, an old Victorian building, stood tall with its Gothic spires and intricate stonework. It was both beautiful and intimidating. I was assigned to a room on the top floor. The elevator, a relic from the past, groaned and creaked as it took me upwards. Upon entering the apartment, the first thing I noticed was the cold. It was a stark contrast to the summer heat outside. The living room was spacious, with high ceilings and large windows that let in a generous amount of light. The wooden floors, though worn out, added to the charm of the place. I was already imagining evenings with my new friends, sharing stories and laughter. Then I met him. David. My roommate. He was already there, sitting on the couch, engrossed in a book. He looked up, his piercing blue eyes studying me for a moment before he extended a hand. "You must be Alex," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something off about him, but I brushed it aside, attributing it to my own nervousness. The first few days were uneventful. We settled into a routine. David was quiet, mostly keeping to himself. He had an odd habit of humming a tuneless song, especially late at night. I would often hear it through the thin walls, a haunting lullaby that seemed to echo in the corridors. As weeks turned into months, I began to notice peculiarities about David. He had an obsession with the old elevator. Late at night, I would hear it groaning to life, and I knew David was taking one of his mysterious trips downstairs. Once, out of sheer curiosity, I tried to follow him. But by the time I reached the ground floor, he was nowhere to be seen. The old caretaker, Mr. Jenkins, mentioned that David often visited the basement, but he didn't know why. One evening, as I was returning from class, I found David in the living room, surrounded by old newspapers and books. They were all about the history of the building. "Did you know," he began without looking up, "that this building was once an asylum?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Many died here," he continued, "their souls trapped forever." I began to feel uneasy in the apartment. Objects would move on their own. I would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling a cold breath on my neck. Whispers echoed in the walls, growing louder with each passing day. I tried talking to David about it, but he would just smile that eerie smile of his and go back to his research. One night, as the clock struck midnight, I was jolted awake by a scream. It was coming from David's room. I rushed to his door, but it was locked. The screams grew louder, more desperate. I pounded on the door, shouting his name. Then, as suddenly as they had started, the screams stopped. The silence was deafening. With trembling hands, I managed to pick the lock. The room was in chaos. Furniture overturned, papers scattered everywhere. But David was nowhere to be found. The only sign of him was a hastily scribbled note on his desk. "They are real," it read, "and they are here." The whispers grew more insistent, voices overlapping, forming a cacophony of madness. I felt a presence behind me. Slowly, I turned around. The room was filled with shadowy figures, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. At the center stood David, or what was left of him. His eyes were vacant, his skin pale. He pointed towards the elevator, which had come to life on its own. I ran. Down the corridors, past the other apartments, the voices chasing after me. The elevator doors opened, revealing the dark abyss of the basement. I had no choice. I stepped in, the doors closing behind me, sealing my fate. The descent had begun. The elevator's descent felt endless. The dim light from the overhead bulb flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the very walls of the elevator were alive with restless spirits. The temperature dropped, each breath visible in the cold air. When the elevator finally jolted to a stop, the doors creaked open to reveal a vast, underground chamber. The room was filled with old medical equipment, rusted beds, and chains hanging from the ceiling. The remnants of the building's dark past as an asylum. In the center of the room stood a large stone altar, stained with what looked like dried blood. Around it were inscriptions, symbols that seemed ancient and foreboding. As I approached, the whispers grew more distinct, forming words, pleading for release. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Mr. Jenkins, the old caretaker. His eyes were wild, his face contorted in a grotesque grin. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped. "This is where they were kept, where they were experimented on. And now, they want revenge." Mr. Jenkins began to chant in a language I didn't recognize. The room seemed to pulse with energy, the shadows dancing to his words. From the corners of the room, figures began to emerge. They were the lost souls of the asylum, their faces twisted in pain and anger. I realized, with growing horror, that David had been trying to free these spirits, but had instead become one of them. He was now trapped in this nightmarish realm, a prisoner of the very entities he had tried to help. As Mr. Jenkins continued his chant, the spirits began to circle the altar, their movements synchronized, forming a ritualistic dance. I felt an invisible force pulling me towards the center, towards the altar. I tried to resist, but it was too strong. Just as I felt my strength waning, a loud crash echoed through the chamber. The elevator had come to life again, its doors slamming open. From it emerged a group of students, my friends from the university, armed with makeshift weapons and chanting their own protective incantations. The spirits recoiled, their dance disrupted. Seizing the opportunity, I broke free from the force holding me and ran towards the elevator. My friends formed a protective circle around me, their chants growing louder, driving the spirits back. Mr. Jenkins, seeing his ritual thwarted, let out a scream of rage. But it was too late. The elevator doors closed, and we began our ascent, leaving the horrors of the basement behind. Back in the safety of the apartment, we barricaded the doors and windows. The university was informed, and the building was soon evacuated. An investigation revealed the dark history of the asylum and the rituals that had been performed there. The building was condemned and eventually torn down. As for David, he was never found. Some say he is still trapped in the basement, a lost soul forever bound to the spirits he tried to free. Others believe he managed to escape, and now roams the world, searching for a way to break the curse. I left the university, haunted by the memories of that night. The whispers still echo in my mind, a constant reminder of the thin line between our world and the realm of the supernatural.